Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a huge one. How do you even begin to scientifically describe consciousness? Well, the answer, it turns out, doesn't start in a lab. It starts right inside your own head.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we'll lay out the big question. Then we'll look at the two main ways scientists get their data, from the inside looking out and the outside looking in. After that, we'll see how they put those two pieces together. And finally, we'll talk about why this two-sided approach is so darn important. All right, let's jump right in with the consciousness question. At the very heart of this whole field, there's this one fundamental challenge, and it all kicks off with a question that sounds deceptively simple. No, really, just pause for a second and think about it. What does it actually feel like to be you right now? The warmth of the sun on your skin, the taste of your morning coffee, that weird feeling when a random memory just pops into your head. How in the world do you even begin to describe that inner world to somebody else? Well, that personal puzzle, that what's it like question, it actually has a formal name in science. They call it the descriptive question. And yeah, as you can probably guess, trying to create a super rigorous objective description of something so purely subjective, well, as the researchers put it, that's far from trivial. That's a bit of an understatement, right? So, okay, if the big question is all about our inner world, then the first place we have to look for answers seems pretty obvious, doesn't it? We've got to start by looking inward. And this process, looking inward, it's called introspection. And it gives us this incredibly rich perspective. I mean, think about it. It is the only direct access we have to our own conscious life. For science to just ignore that, it'd be like an astronomer refusing to look through a telescope. It's this absolute fire hose of information, and you just can't turn it off. And you know what's crazy? For the early pioneers of psychology, this first-person view wasn't just like a nice to have. No way. It was the absolute foundation of everything they did. They saw it as the bedrock. You couldn't build anything else without it. But, and this is a huge but, there's a catch. Just kind of casually looking inward isn't really scientifically helpful, right? I mean, our normal day-to-day self-awareness is messy, it's full of biases and assumptions. To get data that's actually useful, the whole process has to be super rigorous and disciplined. And that brings us to this key idea. And, get ready for it, it's called phenomenologically sophisticated self-observation. Yeah, I know, it's a total mouthful. But all it really means is that researchers have to be trained to observe their own minds with incredible precision. It's almost like an athlete training a specific muscle, learning to notice all the subtle, tiny structures of their own experience that the rest of us just gloss over. Okay, so that's the view from the inside, but that's only half the puzzle. Now let's flip the coin and look at the view from the outside, that objective, third-person perspective, and see why it's so incredibly important. And this is where things get really, really interesting. Because the view from the outside, that third-person data, it can reveal these hidden structures in our minds that we would never notice from the inside, It's kind of like, sometimes the only way you figure out how a machine really works is when it breaks. And this is exactly what we see in what are called deficit studies. Scientists study patients with very specific brain injuries, and they see how experiences that feel totally unified and seamless to us can actually shatter into pieces. Get this, there are patients who can't consciously see an object right in front of them, but if you ask them to guess where it is, they'll point to it with perfect accuracy. How wild is that? It reveals this hidden architecture of our minds that is completely invisible when you're just looking from the inside. So what we're left with are these two totally different but equally essential ways of looking at things. The first-person data, that's the richness, the feeling, the what it's like part. The third-person data gives us the objective structure, the how it's built part. And you absolutely need both. You can't just pick one. Okay, so we've got these two very different kinds of data. How in the world do researchers combine them to build one single coherent picture of consciousness? Well, the key, in a word, is integration. It really works in 3 steps. Step 1, you gather all those rich, detailed first-person reports. Step 2, you use the third-person data, things like brain scans or behavioral studies, to find the hidden structures behind those reports. And then step 3, you integrate them. The cave mapping analogy is perfect here. The first-person report, that's the explorer's journal, full of all the vivid details. The third-person data, that's the super precise laser scan of the cave's actual shape. You need both to create a useful map. And what's so powerful about this integrated approach is that it truly respects the idea of subjectivity. It basically says, look, there are some facts about consciousness, that whole what it's like quality, that you can only ever understand from a first-person point of view. A view from the outside is always going to be missing that essential piece of the puzzle. But at the exact same time, this combined method lets us map out what's called the phenomenal structure. The best way to think about this is like the grammar of a language. When you're speaking, you're not actively thinking about nouns and verbs and syntax, right? You just talk. But that underlying grammar is what makes it all make sense. The phenomenal structure is like the invisible grammar of our consciousness. It organizes our entire experience. And crucially, we can only really see it by looking from the outside. So, let's bring it all home. Why does this two-sided approach matter so much? Why is it so critical? I mean, why can't we just pick a side and stick with it? Well, this gets us to the big takeaway of this whole explainer.
It really boils down to this. To understand consciousness, you need both its content and its context. The first-person view gives us the content, the raw feelings, the colors, the sounds. But the third-person view gives us the context, the structure that holds it all together. It's like one is the painting itself and the other is the frame and the gallery wall it's hanging on. You can't appreciate the art without both.
And that leaves us right on the edge of a pretty exciting frontier, doesn't it? Because as our tools for observing both the inside and the outside get better and better, you just have to wonder, what new, hidden depths of consciousness are we about to uncover?